and we'll get right into the presentation. What we're going to cover today, we're going to cover a number of things. Actually, interestingly enough, just yesterday, somebody came up to me and asked, what is WISEdash? And wow, did I have to think about that. So I went ahead and added a slide around that. It's really important that you understand kind of the history of the basis of WISEdash. So we'll get into that a little bit. And I think you'll find that very interesting. What's new in WISEdash? We're going to go ahead and talk about, for those of you who have been dealing with WISEdash for the last year, we're going to be talking about what's different about WISEdash and what's changed in the last year. We'll also tell you why things have changed, because we want you to understand kind of the method to our madness, right? We've changed some things around. Some people may not like the way we've changed it, but perhaps when you realize why we've done the things we've done, it'll start to make sense to you, okay? We want to talk about snapshots and the snapshot dashboard. Can I ask, how many people are administrators in their district? How many people are teachers? Okay, so very few teachers. So you're interested, you're probably really interested in the snapshot stuff, right? Because you're probably involved with getting data into the system and so forth. That's going to be really important. So we'll drill into that a bit. We'll also talk about data flow and data sourcing, okay? Now, for many of you as administrators, you know, or you'll become aware of this. A lot of your data starts in your SIS, goes to WISEdata, and then goes to WISEdash, right? We'll talk more about the details of that, right? And how that happens and when that gets built and so forth. So we think that that's going to be very important for this group. We also want to talk a bit about advanced analysis, cohort trends, achievement gap. I promised, for those of you who were in the session yesterday, I promised people we talk about that. We'll get into that a little bit more. And then finally, managing cohorts. Okay, we'll find that cohorts is actually pretty interesting and pretty valuable and a powerful tool for looking at students and groups of students that you want to go ahead and track. Okay. First of all, what is WISEdash? Okay, this sounds like a really simple question. Okay, I'm an IT person. I've been an IT person for 30 years. WISEdash is actually something called a decision support system. And that probably doesn't mean a whole lot to people, but think about it this way. At its heart, it's designed to help support decision-making, policy making. Basically, its core function is to go ahead and support policy decisions about improving student outcomes. Okay, why is that important? Because you get to understand why WISEdash is structured the way it's structured, okay? WISEdash is structured in such a way to provide the easy slicing and dicing and filtering of data so that you can look at student data from various perspectives. You can disaggregate by various groups, several disaggregations by cohorts. You can filter by things. You can look at things over trends. You can slice and dice the data any way you want. Okay, the reason that that's important, the reason that supports decisions is because you get to understand where your problem areas are. And that's the core function of WISEdash. Okay, let me give you an example. Let's say you were an administrator, you were looking at your dropouts in WISEdash, and you realized that your overall dropouts was 7%. Okay, well, that's something that you want to fix, right? That's something that you want to create policies around. You try to understand that problem. Okay, so you disaggregate your dropouts by race and by gender and by disability, and you look at things. And then finally, you come across disaggregating dropouts by economic status, okay? And you find something really different. You find something really stark, right? Your economically disadvantaged students are 14% dropout rate, while your non-economically disadvantaged students are near zero, where it used to be, where your dropout used to be. So you do more research. You go ahead and you say, okay, well, what about if I looked at my dropout trends over last years? And you realize that this started to happen 2 years ago. So you drill into enrollments. You say, okay, well, what changed among my economically disadvantaged students? And you realize that all of a sudden 2 years ago, your economically disadvantaged students spiked. Your enrollment for disadvantaged students spiked. Well, then you start to think. You think about what happened in your community, right? You think about, oh, well, wait a minute. Your local manufacturing plant closed down 3 years ago. Suddenly, you've got an economically disadvantaged problem, right? Suddenly, a lot of your students are coming from families of disadvantaged students. Okay, so the next question is, what can you do about it? Well, at that point, you would use WISEdash decision support function to brainstorm and say, how would I solve this problem? You might go ahead and allow more flexibility for students. You might interview students and say, and come to the realization that, hey, students have to help out their family. They're not participating in school. They're dropping out at a higher rate. What if you made a more flexible curriculum, right? What if you changed things at a policy basis to change those trend lines? And that's the power of WISEdash. That's the power of decision support. And that's what WISEdash was originally designed to do. Okay, but the story doesn't end there, right? If you were using WISEdash as just a decision support system, data precision would not be all that important. It wouldn't really matter whether you saw dropouts at 14% or 14.3%, right? What matters in a decision support system is what are the difference in groups? Is it significant here and not significant there? But WISEdash isn't just a decision support system. That's the underlying tool. But the function is decision support, and we also use it for data reporting. Okay, think about the forward results. Okay, we want to be able to slice and dice forward results to understand the performance of forward exams. But we also want, as an organization, as DPI, we want to be able to report accurate forward results to you. Okay, what did John Smith get on the forward exam? What did he get on the various sections of the forward exam? What did he do in ELA? What did he do in mathematics? What did he do in social studies? How did he do better this year as opposed to last year? How did he grow over time, right? We also care about data reporting. And we especially care about that not only in WISEdash for districts, but WISEdash public, where we're required to report data. We're required to make certain reporting requirements in our WISEdash public and our report cards. And then finally, this is where you guys come in, okay? What we've done is we've leveraged the tools that are normally used for decision support to do data reconciliation, okay? And here's a prime example. If you guys are administrators and you use snapshots a whole lot, we're actually using dynamic crosstabs, which is a decision support tool to support data reconciliation. You look at data from last year, the last year snapshot versus current data to understand whether or not your data is accurate. And you might slice and dice that data, but your purpose isn't really for decision support. Your purpose is really to reconcile that data, to say, does my data reflect reality? Okay, so those are really the three cruxes of WISEdash. And I think it was important that we actually go into that a little bit, so I think you understand that a little bit better. Now, WISEdash, as many of you know, is broken down into two portals. It is WISEdash for districts, which is your tool, which allows you to look at confidential student data for your districts, but it doesn't allow you to go ahead and compare across districts very well. We have WISEdash public, which is core function is for public reporting of data. There we have redacted data. We don't have student level data, but we have data that where you can compare district over district or district to state and so forth. So some of you may use WISEdash public for that purpose, but most of your work is probably in WISEdash for districts. What's new? Here we talk about, like I mentioned before, what has been new in the last year. Now, if you're used to the old WISEdash over the last year, you'll see a new menu interface. You'll see a resource of notes, assessment analysis is new, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Of course, we've got a new assessment. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we have something that I think you'll really be interested in, and that is dynamic student cohorts, and we'll actually go into a few screens there. So getting into it, and I talked about it a little bit yesterday. This is an example of the menu interface, but I promised you that we would also go ahead and look at some real demos. So of course, let's get into WISEdash, which I am here. And if you remember the old interface, it used to be black over the top. Okay, so but don't get intimidated by the fact that it's blue. Now, if you remember the old interface, and it's been a while now, I think it's been a year now. If you remember the old interface, if you were on a laptop, sometimes you would see the menu items at the top, and sometimes they would disappear, right? That was really annoying, wasn't it? Okay, that was really hard. What do I do? All of a sudden, I don't have menu options. The reason for that is because those menu options fit on a particular screen length. And if the length of the screen went too far, it would come up with a hamburger menu and you'd have to search for your menu item, right? Well, we changed that so that you can now see all of your menu options over here, and you're less likely to have that problem where you have a scrunch menu. Okay, it becomes a little bit more intuitive. That's why we made the change, okay? Now, what else has changed about this interface? Well, the good thing is that now you see more menu items. You see all the listing of all your dashboards and topic areas in one screen, okay, which is really cool. Okay, one thing that's a little bit confusing is if you're used to dealing with cohorts or you're used to dealing with data inquiry journal, it used to be over here at the top. Now it's over here at the side. Okay, so it's just moved. Don't be intimidated by that. Manage cohorts is here instead of over here. Data inquiry journal is here instead of up here. This may be confusing. This is just for me, and Susan here. We deal with developers tools. You guys don't have to. So you're not going to see that icon when you go ahead and log in. Okay. Ease in navigation, less chance of disappearing menus. So we talked about that. The other big change that we've changed, and this is probably annoying when it first came out, so I apologize, because we just kind of gave an introduction, but we didn't really describe it. It used to be the case that for every topic area, there was a resources dashboard, right? Some of you may remember it. You go to a separate dashboard to see the about the data link, or you see any notes about the data. We took that away. And we took that away and replaced it with a drop down within each dashboard, such that we display resources and notes right on the dashboard. And this is just taking a little while, probably some latency here, but in a minute here, we're going to see the same thing here. We're going to see a drop down for resources and notes. And then we've got it right here. And we've got that in every dashboard so that you can easily find this and not have to leave the dashboard that you're on in order to open up about the data. Okay. If you're in the assessment areas, we've got this everywhere, but if you're in the assessment areas such as forward, you're going to see this, but you're going to start to see a bunch of notes under here as well. And here it's coming up. We're going to see a bunch of notes, and those notes will tell you a lot about when the data was available. So take note of that, be aware of that. That's something that's new. One of the reasons we did that was because as we changed the menu, the new menu would be crowded with all these resource dashboards, right? So once we took out the resource dashboards and turned them into notes, it became a lot easier to navigate, okay? Now, this next change is actually something that came out just before the last assessment season. So about a year ago now, and this is something that you probably are really interested in. Unfortunately, I can't show you the interactive version, but I created a screen snapshot for it. Right now, you can see any assessment within WISEdash, any statewide assessment. You can see Forward, you can see ACT, you can see Aspire, you can see DLM, right, within each of the topic areas. But there's no place up until a year ago where you could see it all together, where you could see all of your students across all of your statewide assessments. So in cooperation with OEA, they've recommended that we create 2 dynamic crosstabs in the assessments analysis dashboard that allows us to show you certified data. We'll talk about certified versus current in a minute. But we're seeing certified data and a breakdown of students by performance level, advanced, proficient, basic, below basic, and then what assessment they took. Okay. Now, as you guys are familiar with dynamic crosstabs, you realize the power that you can go ahead and pull in and take out different dimensions. Well, we've provided the standard demographics over here that you can pull in. So you could go ahead and break the data down by demographic. But you can also break down that data by school level or district level FAY if you wanted to. Okay. So it makes it a very powerful dashboard at taking a broad look at all of your students and their assessments in a particular district and how they rated in their performance. Okay. What we've also included is the no test reason codes. So if you wanted to figure out those students that didn't test and a breakdown of why across assessments, you could use this assessment analysis dashboard to get to that information. Okay. Really powerful. And we've created one, and I'll show you where it is, but I can't really take you down there. You can find it under advanced analysis, assessment analysis. So if you were to go into that, you'll see 2 dynamic crosstabs, one for mathematics, one for ELA. Talked about that. Again, it's certified data, not current data. We're going to be getting into what's the difference when we talk about snapshots. Pre-ACT secure. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but here I can go ahead and show you where it is. Some of you are familiar with this. We replaced the Aspire statewide examination with pre-ACT in 22-23. Okay, so no longer do we have the Aspire for 9th and 10th graders. They now take the pre-ACT. So we had to go ahead and create new dashboards for that. And that's located right here. And if we were to drill into that, you're going to see that it has pretty much the same format as our other ACD dashboards. We have performance levels. We have trends. We're going to have trends as soon as we get 2 years. So that's coming. You don't see trends yet because we only have 1 year of data, but it's going to be very similar to the Aspire and the ACT and so forth. Okay. So that was kind of one thing that we had to get out of the way. Now here's a big one. This is actually pretty cool. I hope you really enjoy this one. This is something I'm really a fan of, and that's dynamic student or public dynamic student cohorts. Okay. Now we're going to be talking at the end of this session how to create a student cohort. But for those of you who are familiar with creating student and school cohorts, you know the power that cohorts have, right? Cohorting is really a means for you guys to create a custom grouping of students and then to look at that custom grouping in different dashboards, right? Which is really awesome because you could take, if you wanted to, you could take all your 504 students and you could go ahead and filter by all your 504 students, right? That's not a disaggregation that we typically have, but you could make it such that you are disaggregating enrollment, attendance, assessments by 504 students, right? Now, we've enhanced that even more. Not only can you create your own custom cohorts, but there's certain groups of students that we know that you want to create cohorts off of, right? Your CTE students, right? Your CTE participant students, your concentrators, your so forth. Maybe your migrant students, maybe your mobile students. So what we've done is we've created what's called a dynamic cohort for you for these various groups of students. And the way to get to it is just like you would in any dashboard, just like you would get to any other cohort. And it's located when you filter data and you go to a student cohort, you'll see all of these pre-canned cohorts sitting here. So you'll see CTE concentrators, current year, and it'll say public, right? that's an indication that that is a dynamic public student cohort. So if you chose that, you could see enrollments or assessments or whatever dashboard you're in by that grouping, by CTE concentrators. And if you look, we've recently also added to this list of CTE participants and graduates and so forth. And we added immigrants, we've added mobile students, and we added the grouping parent in the military. So if I were to choose, I think I'm in, I'm in pre-ACT, I'm statewide. So if I chose parent in the military for pre-ACT, this is my breakdown of pre-ACT results by students with parents in the military, okay? And you don't have to touch it. It gets built every night. So if you went into your SIS and changed your flag to say this student was a student with a parent in the military, and it got up to WISEdata, it would get built into WISEdash the next night. And you'd start to see that student within that group. Make sense? We're a fan of that. And the reason I'm a fan of it is because you guys have come to me, or your predecessors have come to me and says, hey, can we get a new disaggregation, right? Can we get a new way to slice and dice data? And the last time somebody said that, we did it for homeless students, and it took like 50 hours to put together, right? But a public dynamic cohort takes us about 4 hours for us to create and to implement and push out there. So if there's requests that you want to see as far as student dynamic cohorts, we are way open to that. And we would love to go ahead and create functionality on that basis. So that's, I think we've talked about some of the benefits there. We'll actually do more with cohorts if we have time at the end. We'll actually go ahead and do some demos on cohorts so that people are really clear on cohorting. Okay, we've talked about what's new. Let's talk about snapshots, because that's kind of what all of you are really interested in, okay? Let's talk about background of snapshots. Let's talk about snapshots at a high level. Now, I know what it's like to start a new job. I've started plenty of new jobs in my career, and I know what it's like. So you sit down with your pad and paper, you meet with your predecessor, they describe a bunch of steps to doing your job, but you may never have gotten to the high level of what is a snapshot, what is the process, why are we doing what we're doing? That's probably why you're here. So let's go into it. Let's get into it. What's a snapshot? Okay. Well, for those of you who came yesterday, for those of you who were in the beginner's course, you know that we build data every night, right? You change your SIS, it gets into WISEdata, it gets into WISEdash, we build it into WISEdash, you see the change every night. Now that creates a problem actually, right? It gives you current data, and we call it current data because it changes every night. But we don't want to report off of current data. And the reason we don't want to report off of current data is when the federal government comes back to Wisconsin and says, hey, you said your enrollments are X. And we're, we run the query again, and now your enrollments are Y. Well, we need a static version of the data. We need a constant version of the data that we call certified data that's never going to change. That never gets changed. And that's what we use in WISEdash Public. We want that static data. We want that snapshot of current data. So what is a snapshot? It's basically a freeze of our data at a point in time. While the data is traveling into our system constantly and being refreshed, we want to take a slice. We want to freeze that up. We want to save that up. So all a snapshot is a frozen copy of that data. Where does the snapshot happen? That snapshot actually happens in WISEdash, okay? Now, from a technical side, a snapshot is really easy. I set it up all the time. I mean, we do it twice a year. All we do is we go ahead and run a process that saves off tables in our database, okay? The demographics table, the enrollment table, we've got a list of all of these tables. All we're doing is saving it off. That's all a snapshot is, okay? But from your standpoint, it's really important because we use the snapshot for public reporting, we want that snapshot as accurate as possible, right? If your data is off, if you haven't registered all your disabled students before the snapshot, if you haven't registered all your economically disadvantaged students before the snapshot, you're kind of out of luck because now it's frozen in the data, whatever status it is. And that's the importance of a snapshot. So again, snapshot definition is just a frozen copy of current data that's saved off at a point in time. Now, what's the snapshot process? You guys are probably pretty familiar with this. We communicate the dates. There used to be, for those old timers out there, we used to do snapshots, 4 snapshots a year. We've gotten down to 2, right? It's still multiple snapshots, but from what we're communicating to you, it's just 2 snapshot events. It's the demographic snapshot that's typically in May that gets used for the assessment data for static demographics associated with assessments, so that we can publicly report those assessments in WISEdash public. And then also we use that data for report cards. And then we've got the WISEdata student snapshot in December, right? Early December. Now, you guys think of it as one snapshot, but it's really multiple snapshots. It's year-end completions, it's year-end roster, it's year-end attendance, it's current year CDCC, or current year October 1 in TFS enrollment, right? So we collect a lot in that snapshot at year-end or in December, okay? Now, as we approach a snapshot, of course, we've communicated those dates out to you. As you guys get closer to the snapshot, you're refining your data, right? You're getting data into your SISs. You're uploading that data into WISEdata. You're hoping WISEdata gets the data into WISEdash, and then in WISEdash, you look at your snapshot dashboards. Does the data make sense? Do I have all my economically disadvantaged students, and so forth? You really drill into those snapshot dashboards to make sure your data makes sense. You look at your data quality indicators. Do those make sense? And we'll kind of get into the details in a minute. But then also at our level, at the statewide level, we're constantly running reports. So we're looking at the state at a high level. Does this district have graduates, right? Does this district have enrollments? Am I getting enrollments from all the schools throughout the states? So you might be doing your thing, but you might also get a call from CSD or an email from a CSD or some sort of message that says, hey, we're missing some data here. You might want to go back to your data and see if this is right. Right. So we're doing high level checks. You guys are doing lower level checks. And then finally, once we come to the date of the snapshot, then we actually make the snapshot. We actually do that process where we're copying data. And then once that happens, we follow up the data, or we follow up the snapshot with reports to our management. And we kind of summarize the snapshot, making sure everything is okay. Okay. Now we don't go back and change the snapshot. Occasionally we'll do bug fixes or add columns to different data. We might address a snapshot that way, but we typically don't revise the data. Okay. Now this is kind of a nice table. I kind of threw this in here. This kind of maps out what a snapshot looks like to you, how it translates into the internal snapshot, and then how that translates into snapshot dashboard. So if you're in snapshot dashboards in WISEdash for districts, you see a listing of snapshot dashboards like this. But when we communicate the snapshot, you only see 2 snapshots over here. Those 2 snapshots that you see get broken down into 4 snapshots or 5 snapshots that we refer to internally: year-end roster, year-end completion, year-end attendance, TFS in October 1, and then assessments. And then that's how it maps to the spring demographics dashboard, the TFS October 1 dashboards, attendance, year-end completion, career education, and Perkins. Okay. So I think this is in your packet or in the presentation. If you're confused about how things map out, you might want to go back to this graphic, and that'll go ahead and help you. Okay, here again, I apologize. There's some things I can demo, and there's some things I can't, right? Because we're dealing with real district and student data in WISEdash. I can get away with showing you some screens where I have the option to choose all districts and not pick on any one district. But in the case of the snapshot dashboards, I have to choose a district, right? So I can't show statewide data at this point. So that's why we're referring to the graphic. But for those of you who have done snapshot reconciliation through the snapshot dashboards, you're familiar with these data quality indicators at the top. Okay, these are just warning, caution, or informational boxes that sit on the top of each snapshot dashboard screen that help you understand the status of your data. Now, we've made each of these numbers drillable. So if you do find a problem with the data quality indicator, you can go ahead and drill into one or more of these, okay, and see the detail behind it. Okay. Now there's a reason that these are green. Okay. You probably wonder yourself, well, why do I have purple screens and why do I have green screens? Okay. Remember I talked about the difference between current data and snapshot or certified data. Okay. Purple represents the certified data. Okay, that represents snapshot data. Typically, we'll show your last year's data in a purple dynamic crosstab so that you can see what it was in the last snapshot and then use that as a comparison to the current snapshot. Here, these things are in green. Green represents current data. Okay, so what this is telling you is this is the data quality of your current data. And you'll see almost, there is one exception, but almost all data quality indicators are against current data. Okay, now the way to read these are a little bit cryptic. Again, we have different types of these things based on what they're telling you, but these are basically warnings in the data. So we see here, count inclusion TFS equals yes. Okay, now what do you do with that? Right, you go ahead and read that. You get 678. What does that mean? Okay, well, with experience, you might know how many students are in your district that need to be included in the TFS count. That's a check number, right? If that number is close to the number of students that you expect in your head to be around TFS, then you're probably okay, right? If you want to take a look at the set of students that make up that number in the current data, you can drill into that, see the listing of students. You can also export that to a CSV file if you want to, and we can show you how to do that in the help desk. And you can see that list of students. Another example or an information example is your dropout rate. I think we show this on one of the year-end, I think year-end attendance dashboard, but I could be wrong. It's one of the year-end dashboards. But here we show you at a high level what your dropout rate is calculated as, okay? And if you're interested in seeing what students actually dropped out, again, you can go ahead and drill on that. Again, this is informational, right? It might be accurate, it might not be, or it might be something that you might wanna investigate further, okay? Only you can really decide whether 1.2% or 3% or 0.5% is normal or what you would expect, okay? And again, drill down into that to see the exact students that have gone ahead and are listed as dropouts. Oftentimes what happens is that as we approach year end, you take a look at that statistic and then you start making phone calls, right? You start saying, okay, what happened to this student? What happened to that student? What happened to that student? Why is that student in dropout? That's the time for investigation before we get to the snapshot. Now, here's what makes dropouts weird, right? Is dropouts are actually determined in WISEdash. A lot of people are confused by that, right? People think dropouts are calculated in WISE data. They're not. What we do to calculate dropouts is we take enrollment data from WISE data and we analyze the exit type, and we look for the students' subsequent enrollment data so that we in WISEdash determine whether or not the student is a dropout. What sometimes happens is if a student is in error correction in WISEdata, they might appear as a dropout because we don't have any subsequent enrollment because their enrollment is in error, right? Their enrollment is still sitting in WISEdata so that WISEdash thinks it's a dropout, okay? That's what can happen. You know, the other thing that can happen is with dropouts is the wrong exit code, right? Maybe they need to be recoded as a different exit code, okay? That's often a red flag as far as dropouts. And the other thing that can happen is, which is really frustrating and we really understand it, but we don't know a good way around it, is dropouts really depend on the destination of students, right? Let's say, for example, you have a student in your district, they transferred, but they didn't show up anywhere because some other district didn't get their enrollments in, right? Those are things that you want to go ahead and research, but it's hard because you don't have access to that other district's data, right? So there's some follow-up. Another example is schools with no high school completion. Boy, I could tell you a really nasty story about that one. A few years ago, we had a case where probably about 10 districts didn't report any graduation. And that was in the transition between ISIS and WISEdata. And so now we create a warning that says, okay, if you're looking at high schools, what high schools aren't reporting graduates? Okay, so that's behind that one. And here's a real unusual one. I threw this one in here because I created that warning in WISEdash, and we continue to get questions on it, right? Is it an error? Well, no, maybe not. What this last one is telling you, TFS students no longer found. What that means is that the student was found in the TFS data collection, but now the student disappeared even at TFS in the year-end collection, right? So somehow the student disappeared between TFS and year-end. Now that may or may not be a problem, but it certainly warrants some drill down because the student could very well have been entered into TFS in error, right? And that's why they exist that way. But that's something that you also want to take a look and research. Okay, components of the snapshot dashboard. Here again, I probably won't spend a lot of time on it because you're pretty familiar with this, but this is the basis of the snapshot dashboards, right? You typically have two dynamic crosstabs, one in green representing your current data that's actively coming in, one in purple. And the theory is that if you go ahead and disaggregate them in parallel fashions, you can see gaps in data, right? You slice and dice and you say, okay, I'm going to look at students by school. Oh, one of my schools isn't reporting. Okay, there's a gap, right? I'm going to look at my students by grade. Oh, gee, I'm missing grades, kindergarten through fifth. That's a gap, right? Those are things that give you a clue in. You also want to check, of course, disability or by economic status, because there's money that's behind some of those counts. So go ahead and take a look at who's disabled, who's economically disadvantaged. Make sure that those counts also go ahead and make sense or are reasonable based on current year and past year. Okay. Let's take a moment. We're kind of moving on again. That was a long discussion. Do people have questions? I want to just stop and see if there's any kind of questions on snapshot. Yeah. Yeah, actually, we're going to get into that in sourcing, but you're right. The error could be a case where you've entered it into the SIS, but they're pooling in WISEdata and not showing up in WISEdash. So you might see missing students that you've entered that are sitting in WISEdata that aren't making it through. And those are cases where you'd see an error in error correction. But if you don't see an error in error correction, that's maybe more of an indication that it's a problem in your sys, right? Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and once you see the process, well, we're actually going to go ahead and look at the process. And once you kind of see the flow, you're going to realize, yeah, it could be stuck here, it could be stuck there, it could be a WISEdash problem, it could be an error in WISEdash. So
I'm just going to say, especially if the data is missing, like if it never even made it to WISE data, you're not going to have an error for it. So you do need to check WISEdash to make sure everything you expect to be there is there.
yeah. Any other questions before we move on? Yeah. There is, but not a really good one. I think what you're looking for is a way to save off filter choices. There's not a way to save off filter choices, but of course you can change your graphs to PDF. You can also go ahead and save graphics along with the filter choices you've made, and then export that into the data inquiry journal. But there's no real good way of saving your filter options. Yeah, unfortunately, no. I don't have a good answer there. Wish it was different, but that's the reality. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, this is kind of a nice slide. This is how data gets into WISEdash, and it's actually kind of interesting. We get a lot of data every night from WISEdata. We get enrollments, we get student demographics, special education, we get coursework. This list is growing. I think this list was created 3 years ago, and it continues to grow. We get a lot of data from vendors. Okay, these are the two main sources of our data. WISEdata, which is student level data from your SIS, or vendor data, which is typically assessments or FAFSA or post-secondary. Okay. We get both local assessments from vendors, statewide assessments from vendors, and this is the listing here. We no longer, as of this year, get PALS data, but we get MAP and STAR data. For those of you who are not familiar with this, and this is really hidden, and this is something I have to advertise every class that I'm in, and that is we get FAFSA completion data. If your district is interested in getting FAFSA completion, and it's not very widely known, there is a dashboard that is hidden to most people under post-secondary that has FAFSA completions. If your district wants that, you can opt in to get FAFSA completion data. There's a document that you can sign. You can actually look on our DPI website, look for FAFSA, look for WISEdash, and you'll get information on how to sign up for FAFSA data, and then how to go ahead and look at FAFSA completions. That's not really important for most people, but that's oftentimes really important for guidance counselors, right? So if you're at a high school and your guidance counselors wish they could see FAFSA data, this is the way to see it. Okay, we actually provide it, but it's not very advertised very well. And then beyond WISEdata and vendor, we also derive certain sets of data. We talked about dropouts and how they're derived in WISEdash. We also derive graduation rates in WISEdash. And the reason is because we need to know the first year the student was enrolled in grade 9, and that determines their graduation cohort and determines what rate at which they're graduating. We also determine achievement gap. We did determine dues and crews. That's no longer available. And then we also determine growth within WISEdash. This is the graphic I promised you. This is that map, and I hope you enjoy that in the handout. I updated this from last year because it was uglier last year, so I took an afternoon and actually updated this chart. But this is really a map that many of you already understand. And what it does is it starts over here. You actually go ahead and enter maybe step 1. You'll go ahead and look for a WISE ID. when you start looking for student data. If you don't have a WISEID, you'll go into the WISEID system and get a WISEID. And then you're ready to enter the student in your district SIPs. Okay, so that starts here. It goes up to something called EdFi, which is the database behind WISEdata. If it passes error correction, it'll move on. If it's caught up in errors, it'll come back to you in error correction. You fix it in your SIS and you keep fixing data until you get it to go through. Once it gets to WISEdata, it goes into staging tables here. And then once it gets into our staging, once it passes error correction and so forth, we go ahead and put it into what's called a data warehouse. We then go ahead and look at WISEID as well in the data warehouse, and that's how we present student data and summary graphics in WISEdash. Okay, and that's kind of the flow of the data. Of course, going back to your question, yes, things can get caught up in the SIS. Things can get caught up in error correction. In rare cases, things even get caught up in WISEID. And the way things get caught up in WISEID is you might be dealing with one student and your neighbor is dealing with a student, the same student under a different WISEID. That can make things kind of wonky, right? Then you go into duplicate WISEID correction. So yeah, things can get stuck anywhere along here. So, okay. Data load schedule. I promised some. Well, actually, we can look at this graphic right here. But it's on your welcome screen, right in WISEdash. We took a look at it yesterday. For those of you in the beginner class, again, this tells you the source of data. It tells you where the data source came from, what the subject area is, what the upgrade frequency is. Again, for WISEdata data, it's usually every night. For assessment data, it's either every year or 3 times a year if it's a local assessment. That's the upgrade schedule. These are the available years. And then this is cut off. This is actually a note field that we added a few years ago when COVID happened and there were gaps in the available years. So we had to figure out how to note those gaps. Again, that's on the welcome page of WISEdash, right at the bottom, if you're looking for that. Okay. Let's get into cohort trends. Okay, I want to do a quick overview of cohort trends now, but then right at the end, I want to look at some time and we'll actually get into some labs there or into a demo there. If we have time, I can show you more about cohort trends. Cohort trends, oftentimes you'll look at the data in WISEdash and you'll see within data areas, such as in the forward data or ACT data, you'll see that we offer a trends dashboard, okay? Now that's one type of trends, right? If you're looking at trends for 5th graders in the forward trends dashboard, you're looking at a different group of 5th graders year over year, okay? So your 5th grade students in your district in the trends dashboard in forward for 1920 is a completely different set of students as your 5th grade students in 2021, okay? Now that creates a real problem, right? And here, from a statistics standpoint, think of the problem that creates. You don't know how much of that performance variation year over year is from forward performance or from the differences in the set of students that you're testing, right? You can't separate the two, right? Because you've got too many variables in the forward trends dashboard, right? Cohort trends gets away from that problem, okay? Here in cohort trends, we're actually tracking the same set of students based on 1st grade cohort throughout their entire career, okay? We're looking at that same set of students and how they performed. And that takes out that variability. And that becomes incredibly important. Yes. You can do both. And I think let's get into an example at this point. Let's actually get into a demo because I think that that's going to clear things up. Now we can not only look at assessment results, but there's a number of things we can look at in the cohort trends dashboard that are really kind of cool. Now you can find cohort trends under advanced analysis, cohort trends. Okay. Now I'm looking at statewide data. I've got Heights student details on. I've got district all authorized districts. Now it's going to take a long time for it to bring back students. So for the sake of demonstration, I am just going to look at my 2 or more students throughout the state. Okay, so I'm dealing with a much smaller set of students. I'm not revealing anything about student identity. So we're just going to filter by 2 or more students. We are going to go ahead and choose the first grade cohort. Let's choose first grade cohort back in 2011. So in 2011, we're going to look at the students that were slated to be in first grade in 2011 and how they performed in various metrics since then. So that's what we're saying. The 2011 first grade cohort equates to the 2022 graduation cohort. And that's what this is telling you there. Okay. Now, what graphics do we want to look at? We want to look at all charts. And you'll see all the charts that are available. Now, this gets back to this lady's question, grade advancement. Now, if I choose typical grade advancement, it would go ahead and correlate those first grade students with the grade that they pass, right? It wouldn't go ahead and look at those students that were retained or those students that advanced faster than the normal grade advancement, right? So if we wanted to look at all of those students, if we wanted to look at every student, regardless of how they advance through the grades, we'd go ahead and choose all grade advancement. And then we wait just a moment here and it'll come up with data. Now we also do statistics on dashboards, and we found that this is one of the most popular dashboards. Once people start to understand it, they realize that they can see a whole lot of information from this single dashboard. This first one's a little bit hard to understand, but this is a breakdown of demographics. Who's economically disadvantaged in that group? Who's ELP? What genders they are? This is a breakdown of their genders within that grouping. And I'm not getting, what's that? Oh, she reminded me, I still have parent in the military turned on, so I've got to turn that off. Thank you very much. See, even I get tangled up in this stuff. Okay, so now we're starting to see students, okay? This next graphic is actually pretty cool. What this is showing me is that what grade the students were actually in year over year over year. So we see that in 2010, 2011, my first grade cohort, most of the students were in first grade, okay? But a few students statewide from that group, 34 students, were actually still held back into kindergarten, okay? First grade cohort is not when the student actually started first grade. First grade cohort is when the student was slated to start first grade, okay? So their actual grade and their slated grade might be different. Same thing with graduation cohort. Graduation cohort is when the student enters 9th grade, when they're slated to graduate. When they actually graduate might differ from 4 years to 5 years to 6 years to so forth. So what we're seeing as we go through time, we see a various drift. So once I get to 2021, most of my students who have progressed through the grades at the same rate are actually in grade 11, but we're still finding students in grade 10 and grade 9. We see 21 students that have advanced faster than their grade progression and are actually in grade 12 when they were slated to be in grade 11, okay? And that's what this enrollment is telling me. Of course, at the tail end, most of our students have graduated in 21, 22 based on their graduation cohort. But those students that have not graduated in 4 years or have been held back, we get this drift right here at the end. And that's the power of cohort trends. Yes.
In the ones that drift out, are those including the 18 to 21 program?
Yes. So like the graduation cohort 7-year and 6-year. Yep. We have other grade other benchmarks here. We're showing ELA. This is kind of an interesting graphic. If you're interested in your ELA students, you'll of course see a lot of EL students in the earlier grades, and then how that group of students have graduated from English language learning throughout the grade progression, right? So you can see that here. You can also see things on MAP. Here is statewide assessments, their growth level and how growth has changed and whether or not growth has slowed down, grade over grade over grade, access overall performance, English proficiency performance. And then you can also see disciplinary actions over time and how that changes from grade over grade over grade. Now I don't see the assessment. I think we've got an error here, but actually we've got that back in the presentation. So we're going to go back there and I'll show you an example of that. Here's an example of what the assessment dashboard looks like. Okay, and this is actually pretty cool because what this shows us is that group of students and what their performance level is during the various years. Now, of course, you're saying to yourself, well, yeah, but the assessments have changed, and that's true. Okay, but because we've standardized performance levels across assessments, we can actually see this over their entire K-12 career. Okay, so for this group of students, we're actually looking at 2014-15 was when this group of students was typically in grade 11. So we're looking at their ACT performance levels. Here it was WSAS and so forth. It was mostly WSAS for some of the older students, but for some of the newer students, we might see ACT, we might see pre-ACT, forward, all on down to about grade 3. And this is how you track how that same set of students is doing on the statewide assessments year over year over year. Very powerful tool, because again, it takes the variability of different students performing at different levels. You're basically analyzing the same set of students and how they performed over time. That's the power of cohort trends. Wow, that's a mouthful. Okay, we're almost getting to the end here. And we have about 30 minutes left, so we're right on schedule. Let's talk a little bit about achievement gap. We won't spend a lot of time on it because given this group of people, you're probably not terribly interested in it. But be aware, under advanced analysis, we also provide something called the achievement gap dashboards. And these are probably one of the weirdest dashboards you'll ever encounter because we restructured them in a way that is different than any other dashboards. Okay, this is what they look like. Okay, so this is achievement gap dashboard for a single year. Now, what you'll see is we're not looking at individual student performance when we look at achievement gap. We're looking at the comparison of performance between two groups. So oftentimes in here we'll take a look at the comparison group. So we're not seeing disabled students versus non-disabled students. We're actually on each of these, on the x-axis, we're actually looking at, in this case, Hispanic students to white students. We're looking at economically disadvantaged to non-economically disadvantaged students. We're looking at disabled students to non-disabled students. And we're looking at the performance of male to female students. Okay. Now for your district, if you're looking at a particular district and a particular school, you'll actually see yellow, green, and blue bars. You're only seeing yellow right now because this is the statewide results. Okay, this is what I can show you in a public presentation. What we're seeing here by these guidelines is that at the state level, we've got on the forward exam in 2018-19, I'm reading the title, for grade 5 students, we're actually seeing a large gap between disabled students and non-disabled students when it comes to forward performance of 5th graders. That's how to read this. That's state level data. We're also seeing a large gap because the yellow bar is above the red line. That's large. We're seeing a large gap in performance between economically disabled students and non-economically disabled students. We're seeing a moderate difference between male and female students on the forward exam for 5th grade students in 2018-19, because this yellow bar reaches in between. If this yellow bar had gone below the yellow line, then that would be a low difference between performance. That would be something that you might not want to investigate. These bars can go negative, okay? If, for example, the target group and the comparison group are reversed, right? Let's say the economically disadvantaged students do better on the forward exam than the non-economically disadvantaged students, that bar would be negative, right? That's how you read this. Now, again, looking at your district data, looking at your school data, you would see, in addition to each of these yellow bars, you'd see green bars and where that falls on the scale, and then you'd see blue bars for school level gaps and how that falls. Yeah. Yes, it's 20. Good question, but you can get around that. If you go to filters, it says something like hide student data or show all students. You can show the students that have a student count of under 20. And I got to tell you, I argued with the statisticians on that a lot, right? I know this is complex. Statisticians want to come out and say, okay, let's make this as accurate and precise as possible. So let's not show small groups because that's going to skew things. And they're right, but that makes it a little bit difficult to really use on a day-to-day basis. So that's why we created the filter. So now achievement gap also has a trend. So I can see my achievement over time, my gap in achievement over time. And this becomes really cool. This becomes really relevant. And the reason being is, let's say you have a gap. Remember, I did the example of economically disadvantaged students and non-economically disadvantaged students right at the beginning when we were talking about dropouts, right? Well, let's say they had the same gap in forward results. You could see that gap and how that gap moves over time. And that's what you want. When you're managing student outcomes and you're trying to close gaps, you want to be able to see whether your policies are affecting the shrinkage of that gap over time, right? Over the last 5 years. Is my attendance getting better or worse between two groups of students? Are my graduation rates getting better or worse over the last 5 years between different groups of students? Those are the kinds of questions that achievement gap answers. Okay. That's a mouthful. Okay, I promise you, we're close to the end. Cohort maintenance. I'm gonna go ahead and go quickly through these so that we can actually look at creating a cohort inside the software, because I know some of you guys are probably really interested. Again, cohorts are a way to create a custom grouping for filtering and disaggregation inside the software, inside any dashboard. I can go ahead and create a cohort and then use that cohort to filter data or to disaggregate data in pretty much any dashboard. You'll see within the filtering data a line item for a student cohort or a school cohort. That's where you go ahead and use that to filter data. A school cohort, a student cohort is a list of students for which you want to get data from. A school cohort, let's say you're a Milwaukee district or Madison district or a large district, and you wanted to monitor the performance of just a small set of schools. You could create a school cohort that is a listing of schools where you're tracking performance similar to a student cohort. Okay, take a look at that in a little bit. Okay, now to create a cohort, we refer to a group management guide. That's something that's available through our website. But to create a cohort, once you drill down into a list of students, now of course, normally you'd see this list of students, but I've got to mask it on this graphic here. But when you get into student detail and you see that listing of students, you can go ahead and choose the students you want as part of a cohort, or filter this listing and choose all the students in this listing. And then you do an add group, and then you go and it'll prompt you whether you want to add that list of students to an existing cohort, or whether you want to create a new cohort and you enter it there. Okay, and again, we'll go through an actual example of this. You choose the tailored group. You can view the results of the tailored group through the filter. And then you can also go ahead and want to let you know that there's a way to go ahead and use your cohort in a group by. And we'll actually see an example of that. So I'm kind of going a little fast so that I can show you that a little bit better. To do that in the group by, you'll actually see an option down here at the bottom that says student cohort. So let's go ahead and do that. And then, sharing cohorts. One of the other advantages to cohorts is you've gone ahead and put in a lot of work to creating a cohort. You've got this custom list of students. You don't want to lose that students. And as a matter of fact, you share work with maybe 2 or 3 other people in your office. And you want to be able to share that cohort, that list of 504 students, that list of parents in the military students, which you don't have to share anymore. That list of students that you want to track, right? Well, you can share that cohort with your coworkers. And there's a way to do that. You actually go into manage groups. You go ahead and choose how you want to share that cohort, whether or not you want to give your office mates full collaboration, or whether they could just use the cohort, or whether they could collaborate is whether or not they can add to the cohort. And then that's basically it. You actually get to it through group management through this little icon here. And we can go through an example as we still have some time here. In addition to predefined or dynamic student cohorts, we actually have predefined school cohorts. That's not probably terribly interesting unless you're a huge district or unless you're DPI. Okay. At DPI, we have access to all districts. So we'll oftentimes look at school cohorts and say, okay, give me the performance of all Perkins schools. Give me performance of all Title I schools, right? If you're a small district, you probably have 3 schools. If you're Milwaukee or Madison or Kenosha, you probably have so many schools that you do want to track that. So we provide that through a predefined set of school cohorts. It is possible to create a school cohort if there are large districts in here. The way to do that is you can either do that in the detail of achievement gap or in school listing. And we'll actually take a look at that, because even though I can't create a student cohort, I can create a school cohort, and the process is very similar. So I'm going to use the school cohorts as an example so that you can at least see how that gets set up. Okay, we're not going to go into Q&A yet. We've got about 19 minutes left. I'd like to take a few minutes to actually show you cohorts a little bit more, because people are interested in labs. People are interested in demos. So let's go ahead and get into it. If I want to create a cohort, I can go ahead and let me again create a school cohort. You can extend this example to student cohorts, but to create a school cohort, I go into school list. Here I have my check boxes, just like I would in student detail. Pretend like this is student detail. And if I wanted to see performance related to, in my case, all Abbotsford, all Adams, I'm just going to choose a bunch of these. Albany, and I apologize if any of you are from these districts. I'm trying to make this obscure enough so that we're not showing any specific data. So, but I'm picking a bunch of districts up here, starting with A's. I go to actions. I go to add to groups. I go to create new group, and I could say my school I'm going to call it my schools cohort because I think I have another one out there. My schools cohort, and I'm going to press save. Now, in order to use that cohort, I go into a dashboard. Let's say I go into enrollment. And it's checking. It might kick me out because I might have been in there an hour already. Okay. Okay. Might still be lucky. I look for my school cohort filter and I look for my schools cohort is listed here. So if I want to look in enrollment for just that set of schools and take out the 2 or more, this is any enrollment from that set of schools that I created a cohort on. I can do the same thing in student detail for students as I just did for schools, okay? And again, let's use our public cohorts. Let's go ahead and actually use, let's go back to our parent in the military. So if I want to if I wanted to look at parent in the military students for a particular district or for all districts, I'm going to do all districts in my case. I go to the student cohort filter, which is here. I choose my parent in the military, which is here. And I've got 8,000 students statewide with parents in the military. Okay, now let's say I wanted to disaggregate by this. Let's see the enrollments of parent in the military versus students with not parents in the military. I can go ahead and do that by filter data, group by, and choosing student cohort here at the bottom. And it chugs and it chugs and it chugs. And what I'm seeing is this is a disaggregation of that particular cohort. Okay, so you can imagine how powerful that could be. If I'm in graduation rates, if I'm in forward results, I can do the same thing. Group by student cohort, and I can disaggregate by students within the group versus students outside the group. And let's go ahead and do that. Let's actually go into so that you can see how powerful this is. Let's go into my forward results. Okay, this is the performance statewide of students with parents in the military in the current year for 22-23 versus the same breakdown for students that don't have parents in the military. Okay, pretty powerful tool, huh? Okay, pretty cool. Okay, now let's go ahead and just real quickly, I want to leave at least 10 minutes left for questions. But if I wanted to go ahead and go back and manage a cohort or share a cohort, remember we created my school's cohort? This is my school's cohort. I can go ahead and edit the cohort here, and it gives me the listing of all my schools. It gives me the effective date of my cohort. Don't touch this. This is actually a bug. If you created a public cohort, everybody would have access to that cohort, but it wouldn't choose anything because not everybody has access to the student data. I can also go ahead and share this cohort to my group of my cohorts, my own cohorts. I can share by user, and it will give me a list of people in my district or people in my area. And then if I wanted to share it with, we'll choose Vinod. Vinod is a person in my group. But I don't want to give Vinod the ability to add schools. I just want him to be able to use the cohort. I'll give him read only on this cohort. I press save, and now he sees that in his list as well. Okay. If I wanted to, I could create groups with cohorts. This is really getting kind of crazy. But I could create a new group, and then I could choose, let's say I have a large district. I could create cohort groups of my teammates within a large district, and then I can determine sharing within those particular groups. So very powerful. And now we're really at the end. This is, we're about at time. So if I left about 13 minutes for questions or things that people want to see, So now let's open it up. Yes. Oh, good question. I can't give you a brief one because I'm long-winded, but let's go back. I'll try to be as quick as I can. This is a data inquiry journal. It's part of the utilities. Wise Explore is really behind the data inquiry journal. The purpose of the inquiry journal. Remember going back to the original slide where I said WISEdash is a decision support tool and it's used for solving policy decisions, right? The data inquiry journal is a way for groups of people at school districts to track a problem that you might be tracking, right? Remember in my example, I said, okay, we had low performance or high dropouts of economically disadvantaged students, right? That was the example I gave at the first slide. I might create a data inquiry journal around that problem and then use screen snapshots and share this data inquiry journal with people in my group so that we could track that problem and we could see different perspectives of that problem. It's basically a notebook around that problem and solutions that you've tried around that problem. So it's really a nice area for collecting notes among groups of people for tracking such policy decisions. So that's basically what it is. Any other questions? Or anything else you want to see that I can show you? We went through a lot, probably got a headache right now, so I apologize for that. So, okay. Well, thank you very much for your time today. Again, I got a few minutes up here if you want to talk more. Also, we have a lab down right at the end of the hall if you have more questions on WISEdash or WISE data or what have you. So, thank you.
But they appear to be all graduates.